morning, wherever you are, depending on where you are. Welcome to the session on sanctions and organized crime, part of this webinar series. This is the second session of the series called Central African Republic, the Kimberley Process and Criminal Shaping. I'm Ana Paula Oliveira, Senior Analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, and I'll be your moderator for this session today. A few housekeeping rules before we start. This session is being recorded and live streamed, and you can access to simultaneous translation in English and French by clicking on the globe button in the bottom of the Zoom page. We will have a panel presentation followed by 2 discussants and a Q&A session. So please feel free to send your questions and comments at the Q&A function, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned, this webinar today is part of a broader series on sanctions and organized crime, seeking to explore the growing evolution and impact of sanctions against criminal actors, drawing from a recent research initiative from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. This research includes global reports, country-specific, thematic studies, and for those who didn't have the chance to attend at the first webinar, you can access this recording at the Global Initiative's webpage and check on the discussion on the evolution of sanctions against organized crime. Today, we will have a closer look at the impact of the Kimberley Process in Central African Republic. We will look at how it has influenced the evolution of natural resources extraction in the country and how this has impacted on security and political dynamics. Based on the report, which is being officially launched today, called a blunt tool for a delicate task, the Kimberley Process and illicit markets in the Central African Republic. To walk through this discussion, we have a stellar panel. Eleanor Beaver, author of the report and a senior analyst at the West African Observatory at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. She's a researcher specializing in non-state armed groups, violent extremist groups, transnational organized crime, and climate environmental security. Eleanor will give us the background of the Kimberley Process, focusing mainly on how the suspension initially affected the Central African Republic in 2013 to 2016 period, and the rise of the illicit market. Following Eleanor's presentation, we will hear from Maxi Muwonge. Maxi has over 18 years of expertise in managing high-risk projects in post-conflict countries. He specializes in critical initiatives to address land conservation, biodiversity, and natural resource governance in the mining sector through multidisciplinary approaches. Maxi will cover the period from 2016 to 2025 and the impact on miners, mining governance, and the Kimberley Process operating framework. We will then listen to Vianney Ingasso, who is a journalist and fact-checker for the Radio Netke Luka Imbangi, covering political, security, and social issues. He will offer some thoughts about the conflict and the impact of the Kimberley Process and other sanctions on violence today, as well as armed groups' contemporary use of gold and diamonds. So without further ado, Eleanor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. I hope everyone can hear me, and it's a pleasure to see you all here today. As Anna said, I'm going to start with a quick introduction to what the Kimberley Process is and how it works before we start looking at how the illicit market changed things. Can we have the first slide, please, Claudio? Okay, second slide. Thank you. The Kimberley Process is a trade regime that's working for the objective to prevent the sale of conflict diamonds on the formal market, and conflict diamonds, as they are understood by the Kimberley Processes, are defined on this slide. The Kimberley Process, when it was established in 2003, was hailed as a very innovative partnership because it was a partnership between states, the diamond industry, and civil society, all working as stakeholders in this tripartite arrangement. Now, from the start, these three parties never had equal sway. States alone have voting rights, while the diamond industry and civil society groups have representative bodies that allow them to lobby and advise. And as you can probably guess, the priorities of those two bodies are not always aligned. The conflict diamond definition hasn't been updated since the process was created in 2003. So as you can see, rebel groups still very much at the core of what is understood to be a conflict diamond by the process. And to see the challenges of implementing the Kimberley process, you need to look at two levels. So firstly, the kind of transnational diamond market, and secondly, in the national market of diamond producers. A lot has already been written about what goes wrong at the level of the transnational market, so I won't spend too much time here, but it is worth refreshing memories and introducing it for those who are less familiar. Can we have the next slide, please, Claudio? The key point is that the Kimberley process is ultimately a certification scheme. It's a paper trail. So a certificate is created for a rough diamond that is mined in any Kimberley process compliant zone. And that certificate is meant to accompany a diamond on its journey to its buyers. Now, in practice, that certificate is actually only technically necessary for the initial export of the diamond for its country of origin. So if, for instance, an intermediary buyer buys that diamond, they are not obliged to send on the certificate on the next leg of that diamond's journey. And as you may be able to see from the graphic, there's all sorts of loopholes throughout the process that would allow you to mix illicit, non-compliant, perhaps conflict diamonds into parcels of so-called mixed origin. Meaning that it's in practice quite easy to send on mixed parcels without all of the certificates attached. Likewise, the Kimberley process only still applies to rough diamonds. So if you cut and polish a diamond before selling it, it is effectively exempt from the regulations. So when you're confronted with a process that has a lot of obvious loopholes, it begs the question, who is this objective of stopping conflict diamonds for? The Kimberley process has never made a secret about the fact that there are multiple intended beneficiaries, one of whom is the diamond industry, and by extension, diamond producing countries that benefit from that industry. The diamond industry and likewise the Kimberley process member states are generally very keen to emphasize their commitment to the process. It keeps the diamond industry looking clean, and it keeps a more positive image of diamonds as a consumer product. But the moral argument, and the argument being advanced by civil society, is that the main beneficiaries of this effort should be residents of conflict-affected countries, and specifically those in which conflict parties exploit or benefit from diamond revenue. In theory, less diamond revenue for conflict parties should at least help to impede the continuation of war. Now, it's been over a decade since the Central African Republic was suspended in 2013 due to the Seleka coalition's overthrow of the regime of François Bozizé. Seleka was known to be very reliant on revenue from diamonds and gold. And obviously, if a country is suspended from the Kimberley process, theoretically, it cannot export its diamonds because Kimberley process certificates can't be issued. And here's where the question of who benefits really comes in. Because the vast majority of Central African Republic or CAR's diamond mines are mined by artisanal miners, they're not mined by industrial miners. So these are mostly ordinary people, they're working informally. They might take up and leave artisanal mining on an ad hoc basis, and they don't have really any formal protections. And whether these miners are operating in territory controlled by rebel groups or not, it's quite hard to overstate how much of a lifeline artisanal mining can be for large numbers of Central Africans. Can I have the next slide, please, Claudio? Can we have the next? Thank you. I just want to try and put this need in context. And so I'd like to draw attention to a really remarkable public health survey of Central African Republic that came out late last year. And this survey found an extraordinarily high mortality level and some really disturbing statistics on food insecurity. So this survey was quite unique. They managed to access a lot of non-government controlled areas to collect data. And what they found was that 82% of respondents were eating less than one meal a day, and that most people didn't have access to healthcare. And I'm not trying to draw a link between the Kimberley process and a mortality crisis. I really just want to make the point that in CAR, for most people, any source of income is really essential, and any source of income additional to agriculture or subsistence food production is very essential for survival, particularly as you can see from some of the quotes on the screen, when conflict and displacement make growing crops very difficult. So mining is really the only prospect of aspiration, but also really key to survival for a very large number of CAR's residents. And so by extension, to block an entire market for a whole country's mining products will have very serious social consequences for miners and for their communities and their dependents. Now, this is recognized to an extent within the Kimberley process structure. And so in 2016, can we have the next slide, please, Claudio? There was a partial lifting of the suspension, allowing the 8 sub-prefectures that you can see in green in the west of the country to obtain Kimberley process certificates for mines mined in these regions. And this would allow, so the theory goes, the Central African state to benefit from some diamond revenue and would see these provinces develop access to formal markets. The problem was that by the time 2016 rolled around, in those 3 years, the damage to the formal market was already really done. Can we have the next slide, please? You can see these are quotes from our report, and you can see in the top one that the number of carrots exported in 2022 is less than a third of what it was in 2013. That is partly because the Western compliance zone that you saw in the map is only one of CAR's 2 or 3 major diamond deposits, and the rest are still ineligible for formal export. But there are other factors that have also taken a major slice out of that market. So what happened? This is where the role of illicit markets really comes in very strongly. Because selling diamonds in CAR is a very complex business. Unlike gold, perhaps, rough diamonds have no intrinsic value in the Central African Republic itself. The value of a diamond only exists after it has been cut and polished, and that's a process that so far happened abroad, and international diamond buying markets are a very long way from CAR. So what you need to get your diamond from mine to market is a very sophisticated network of buyers and middlemen to take those diamonds from artisanal miners. The other point that's important is that CAR's diamonds are alluvial. So this means that they're spread over very large areas, and diamond buyers need to be able to pre-finance what could be months of labor in order to find any diamonds in the first place. And then you need an intermediary with close enough links to the mining company who's trusted to take the rough diamonds, sell them to the buyer, and redistribute the money fairly. Now, interestingly, before the initial suspension in 2013, very few of Central African Republic's diamonds were smuggled out. There were large diamond buying houses that had these sorts of elaborate networks, and the experts that we spoke to estimated that these buying houses managed to get hold of about 80 or 90% of CAR's artisanally mined diamonds and then sell them on the formal market. Now, it's important to say that it wasn't just the Kimberley process that did this damage. The conflict and the 2013 crisis itself also did very substantial damage to these networks of trust, and they forced many diamond dealers to flee. However, keeping the formal market repressed for those 3 years eliminated the need for those networks to reestablish themselves, and likewise eliminated any desire to invest in diamond mining or to pre-finance it. And more importantly, miners started to find that they could deal independently with diamond smugglers. Since diamond smugglers don't have to pre-finance diamond mining, they were able to offer higher prices directly to the miners. And that in turn further undermines trust between miners and their former networks. And many miners came to believe that these networks had ripped them off or engaged in price fixing, which on occasion may have been true. But the other important thing that happened as a result of the immediate aftermath of the Kimberley process was a very large rise in artisanal gold mining as an alternative to diamonds, which meant that even less of the diamond market was being invested in. And so what we have now is a situation where even in the areas that miners could sell diamonds on the illicit market, they very often choose not to. It's much simpler, even in the case of those Western compliant provinces, to take them over to the border into Cameroon and sell them there. And you can see one of the former UN experts quote on screen describing how easy this is. And so looking at all this, it's very hard to conclude anything other than that the Kimberley process supercharged the illicit market after that initial suspension, and that the formal market, although it's starting to recover, that full recovery is a long way away, and it's going to face a lot of challenges. And I'd now like to pass over to Maxi for some further detail on the more recent phase of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. You've given a very good elaborate details about the whole Kimberley process and how it comes to be absolutely a challenge for Central Africa, for all actors. So I'll base myself around the implication of the implementation of this Kimberley process post-conflict. That means that when Central Africa was invited back into the framework of the Kimberley process in 2015, when it exported, and just to be precise, I got the figures of about 12, they show the figures. So we are seeing a country that before the embargo, which was exporting over 460,000 carats, starting again after the suspension at 12,000, just 12,000 carats. Do the calculation, that means almost 90% of the previous production was not on the market. Because the way the Kimberley process approached the matter was to say that, we're only going to validate certain zones, with basically a mission to validate. Brief, in terms of the impact, by trying to shift within less than 3 years, in 2012 to 2015, 3 years when the country was not exporting, the exportation dropped from about 400 to just 12,000 carats. The impact's quite clear there. We are seeing everything going to zero, the market. And what is very funny about when you look at the Central African market for diamonds, most so likely it were the Muslim community that had gone and who were the negotiators, who were the people buying the diamonds. And studies have confirmed that the first thing that happened when the embargo happened is that the diamonds followed the buyers. So statistics show that the declared exports dropped, but when you look at USGS studies and others, the production continued. So the impact of the suspension of the Kimberley process and later the reopening in phases, there is no doubt that it kind of contributed to the regional dynamics of fraud and contraband of the diamonds, because the market went away because of the war, but the market never stopped buying. Impact directly is that we see directly the link of regional fraud because of the problem in Central Africa, the market is there. Number two is basically who benefits then. And the benefits have been already articulated. When we have networks that are involved in fraud and contraband, the local market or the local artisanal man does not have the market's power to negotiate. First of all, he has to bribe everyone to cross the border. And number two, when you're in Cameroon or when you're in some other neighboring countries that studies have confirmed where the diamond goes, you don't have the negotiation power. You take whatever you're given. So we are seeing already that even when the people who remain could be able to do the activity, they don't have the market control. The market is declared by external forces. And then when it comes to the whole Kimberley process, and this is, I've participated in the KP session, Botswana and others, where the issue was the Kimberley process, the way it was done for Central Africa, a mitigation strategy to combat conflict and conflict minerals, or is it something that should have already been eliminated? For three reasons. One, the structure of the Kimberley process in terms of Central African formalizing it is expensive. We are talking about a secretariat of the Kimberley process that has to conduct certifications in the most deserted areas, some of them not even under government control. Of course, we know those ones are not supposed to export. But even when we talk about the Southwest or the West, where we have the validated zones for the KP, who is paying for that kind of process of compliancy? Short answer, it were the partners, because I was on the ground. You have a situation where Kimberley requirements of due diligence, and the Central African government does not have the capacity financially and logistics to implement these measures. They don't have the mining police. They don't have the administration, which is regional, to really verify. There's no clear database on infractions. So all the framework of the Kimberley process is not effectively done, meaning that the Central African government accepted as something that they have to apply, but they cannot effectively implement it because they don't have the means. And the consequence of that is that the Central African government has always been in the Kimberley process accused of its capacity to compliance zones, maybe entering the compliance zones. But the question is that, does the government has the capacity to monitor the whole country to ensure that these minerals are not contaminated? In brief, the Kimberley process was a very welcome measure in 2015, but as you move forward to 2022, 2025, and moving forward, we need to see how the approach of the Kimberley process has to change. You cannot certainly say that the zones that are not compliant, Central Africa has over 24 diamond producing zones, but less than 11 are right now considered compliant. The whole zone of the west of the center, which is the second area where it has not been validated. So the direct consequences, who is taking the minerals? Can we assume that these minerals are being thrown away because they're not compliant? If the Central African government says we are not following that production because it's not compliant, who's benefiting that production? And number two, what is the community element in all this? Because part of why there was conflict, and for those who are going to argue the angle of conflict, it is the disparities between means of access to natural resources and the governance around land rights and natural resource rights as part of the drivers of this conflict. Now, when you have government absent in managing minerals where it is considered conflict minerals, how do you ensure communities benefit? We all know where we had the 3R, Trazel, and others, that it was their regime that was governed. It is them that decide how much tax an artisanal miner will pay to access the mine site. So the exploitation continues, and therefore what the Kimberley process sought to do to help Central Africa, we don't see a direct benefit, especially in areas that are still considered non-compliant, where Central African government does not necessarily collect these minerals. So we see that we have still a very big question to ask about the whole framework of the Kimberley process. For record, since I follow the KP carefully, it is the first time in the history of the KP where an embargo was lifted in phases. Most countries either can export or not export. Central Africa finds itself in a situation where production goes on, they know production is there, but they cannot accountabilize it because KP has said that's not compliant. So look at all the linkage in terms of community loss, about the question of alimenting armed groups, the question of really trying to make it very difficult for the government to make proper socio-economic developments out of the minerals they consider red minerals. And in terms of the implication therefore on the dynamics, and I'm going to talk about the regional dynamics, there are certain things that we all know that when the government of South Africa cannot realize revenue from diamonds, therefore certain actors have come, really interesting actors, to really sign contracts. Some of them, the contracts are for security, but studies have confirmed that in return, they take diamonds. So which diamonds do they take? Or they take timber, which is not the question of today. So we have seen new arrangements coming in to take this kind of diamond that the KP does not want as compliant. The government is trying to see how to deal with that. And therefore, we see new geopolitical dynamics coming in today. Hey, if one party of the KP compliant, we are members of the KP. For us, we have no problem with those minerals. So you are creating a very complicated dynamics, even for the countries on economic development, where the KP is not unanimous on the question of Central Africa. So we see directly geopolitical dynamics coming, which are a challenge around how to make the minerals of Central Africa, useful to the country and the development of the community. I will stop around the points of studies have confirmed that most of the criminality networks, including some of the known international terrorist groups, have tried to benefit from the red minerals. That means more insecurity, that means more problems in Central Africa. But the question is that even when these kind of people are being published or identified, there is no regional sanction mechanism to help Central Africa. Central Africa received marching orders on what it has to do to make sure its diamond reaches the international market, but Central Africa does not have any support apart from donor-driven projects to help it match those standards. So who sanctioned if we know that the diamond was trafficked to a certain country? I don't want to name countries, but we know where these diamonds go. If it is known that a certain person has taken diamonds and is related to armed groups, what is the role of other actors in helping Central Africa recover all? So you see that we are trying to create loopholes where even the real security of Central Africa has been made to be, questionably, endangered. And finally, when we talk about moving forward with the KP, my question I always ask myself is, what is the interest of Central African government right now to continue to respect the Kimberley process? I have been in meetings where people really even want to walk out, because if your hands are tied by a process that cannot finance its mechanism, so the country has the requirements of the KP, but the country wants donors to make those requirements implemented. So you're giving an extra burden to a country which is poor, which can't even afford paying all its civil servants, and you want it to pay for the Kimberley process framework. So it doesn't work. And we know on the ground, it does not work. How do you deal with the regional dynamics? What is the role of the regional parties? Others involved, Central African regional frameworks, maybe and other regional frameworks, to make sure those who benefit from the diamonds that are considered red are brought to book, or Central African government can have these diamonds sold on auction to get back the money. So the current arrangement, in brief, does not help Central Africa at any way to make itself better in terms of compliance, because those who have the minerals, who are red, they're buying more arms, and they're making it difficult for the government communities working under armed groups have to pay taxes, have to pay every sort of concession to be allowed by armed groups to work in those areas. So it's a very delicate process, and I don't think the Kimberley process at the current situation is really beneficial at any level to the Central African government, neither to the community, neither to help security, neither to help any other dimension that the KP was made to in terms of making those diamonds beneficial for the African country called Central Africa. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, both Eleanor and Maxi, for your interventions and for this comprehensive overview on the impact of the KP in CAR. I'll now give the floor to Vinny. I hope you can hear us good.
Oui, parfaitement, même s'il y a un petit souci avec le réseau, mais ça va, ça va.
Vianney, if you can give us your thoughts on the discussion that we are having today. I'm sure everybody's super interested to hear what are your discussion points for this topic.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai suivi avec beaucoup d'intérêt les échanges ici. Ben, je vais particulièrement m'appesantir sur le rôle que jouent les groupes armés dans le processus de Kimberley qui a entraîné encore la reconduction de l'embargo sur la République centrafricaine du Sud depuis novembre 2023. Cette interdiction aujourd'hui vise 8 sous-préfectures où les groupes armés y sont encore actifs. Et quand je suivais Maxi qui parlait de quel levier dispose le gouvernement centrafricain ou de quel intérêt le gouvernement centrafricain a à respecter le processus de Kimberley, je trouve cette problématique très, très intéressante parce qu'aujourd'hui, il y a des groupes armés qui de manière frauduleuse. Et ça, c'est encouragé. Et par certains acteurs gouvernementaux, certains ministres du gouvernement qui sont leaders et membres de groupe. Ils vous montrent lors de son discours à la nation a réellement reconnu qu'il y a eu une qui est officielle, mais sur et dans les pays où le diamant centrafricain se vend, les chiffres qui est réalisé à l'extérieur de ce pays, nous avons déclaré officiellement le processus de Kimberley. Donc aujourd'hui, beaucoup plus la question est liée avec les groupes armés et aussi avec la présence de vagues qui, chaque jour ou presque toutes les semaines, des chantiers miniers dans les régions nord-est où chaque mois rapporte des incidents sur ces chantiers miniers où un peu toute difficulté qui pose problème ou le respect du processus de Kimberley en République. Donc aujourd'hui, la et le gouvernement n'a aucun moyen de contrôler ces régions, de contrôler différentes localités où on exploite les diamants en République centrafricaine, notamment la région de la Haute-Côte, où les mercenaires de Wagner ont mis pied dans tous les chantiers miniers dans cette partie du pays. Ça aussi, c'est vous avez la région de la Vakaga, vous avez les chantiers miniers et ceux sont africains. Voilà un peu toute la complexité et la transparence dans la mise en œuvre du processus de Kimberley. Donc, tout c'est le marché illicite. Si on revient du côté du sud-ouest, préfecture de la Sangambaéré, de la Maméré, KDI. Tous ces diamants qui sont exploités dans ces régions sont via le Cameroun et selon une dernière étude faite par le bureau local, le comité local, en ce qui concerne l'industrie d'extraction, tout indique que le Cameroun est devenu aujourd'hui la plaque tournante de toute contrebande en ce qui concerne l'exportation des diamants africains. Et tout ça pose aujourd'hui problème quant à ce qui concerne la redistribution ou les le problème est vaste, mais le centrafricain n'a aucun moyen aujourd'hui de mettre en place un mécanisme de contrôler le chantier des diamants. Du président, on avait mis en place une unité qu'on appelle UISAF, une spéciale d'antifraude minière en République centrafricaine, même c'est de la gendarmerie et des policiers, mais ils sont pleinement dans aussi mafia, hein, je peux dire dans la mafia. Allô?
We can hear you, Venia. I think if you keep your camera off, it's better for us. So please continue like this. Thank you.
Ok, d'accord, merci. Donc voilà, donc je parlais de cette unité spéciale créée par le gouvernement centrafricain de contrôler ou de réprimer, d'empêcher la contrebande des diamants centrafricains, même des officiers de cette unité détachée dans certaines régions où on exploite les diamants centrafricains participent aussi activement à la contrebande ou à la mafia, à ce commerce illicite de diamants en République centrafricaine. Voilà tout un problème aujourd'hui qui pose face au gouvernement centrafricain à mettre en œuvre ou à réintégrer le processus de Kimberley pour permettre aux Centrafricains de bénéficier dûment de la vente de leurs diamants, de tout ce qui concerne l'exploitation diamantifère en République centrafricaine. Mais le vrai problème aujourd'hui se pose à ce niveau interaction des groupes armés, des forces de l'ordre et sans oublier la délivrance outrancière des exploitations diamantifères à des coopératives, à des artisanaux qui
I think we are having some issues with the connection. Eleanor and Maxi, I think we can address some of the questions there are in the Q&A at a minute, and then if we have the chance to go back to Vinia, we can do it afterwards, if that's okay with you.
That sounds
so
great.
Yeah, so let's do that. I think there are two questions addressed to Maxi in the Q&A. So the first one is, what responses have been there by international organizations and civil society groups working outside the diamond mining industry? And another question, a process that cannot finance its implementation mechanisms is doomed to fail. How do you address this point? And I would have another question, perhaps this one is for you, Eleanor, about the concept of conflict diamonds under the KP. and what are the controversies around this concept and updating this concept. So if you could go, perhaps you go first, Eleonore, and then Maxi to the other two in the Q&A.
Sure. Yeah. So this is one of the interesting struggles about updating that definition. So I think that most observers would agree that many of the conflicts of the 2000s were very strongly reliant on diamond mining, and that the KP had quite a positive effect in reducing the availability, reducing the ease with which they could profit from diamond revenue. But I think the situation today is a lot more complicated, not just because rebel groups continue to exploit diamond revenue, but often alongside a variety of other sources of revenue. So it's not, in my opinion, it is not quite as easy as saying that if you eliminate revenue from diamonds, armed groups will start to suffer serious setbacks. It may be the case, but I think it's going to be quite rare because their sources of finance are very diversified. But in regards to the controversies around the definition, I mean, one of the very tense aspects that have divided discussions, the discussions within the KP itself in the past year, is the role of the Russian diamond mining industry, and indeed Russia's wider dealing in diamonds, and whether it's to what extent it's the invasion of Ukraine is facilitated or by diamond mining revenue. Now, the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition has been very vocal in at least trying to address this matter, and in their view, that definition needs updating so that at the very least all conflict parties who benefit from diamond mining revenue should be eligible for sanctioning under the Kimberley Process. Now, obviously, but what has happened in practice is that those discussions have effectively been blocked by a number of Kimberley Process members, which means they've never even got on the formal agenda for talks, and this led to some of the talks in the past year breaking down. The other controversy, that's kind of dogged the Kimberley Process for at least a decade now, is that slightly longer actually, is whether violence in mining practices and whether ethical mining practices should be an aspect considered by the Kimberley Process when certifying its diamonds. So there's at least one very prominent member of the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition left just over this very controversy. At the moment, the two most probably more powerful stakeholders in the Kimberley Process, so those being state governments and the diamond industry, have been very reluctant to widen this now very outdated definition, but it does mean that it is a very limited tool in the fight again in the Kimberley Process's own objective of trying to stop conflict diamonds, and indeed in trying to create a more ethical diamond industry, and likewise has very little power to shape the markets and contexts in which it's applied.
Thank you. I will start to respond with my friend, the colleague Mamadou. Oui, Mamadou, il y a beaucoup des études faites par les acteurs, inclus les partenaires des gouvernements, mais également, si vous avez vu des rapports ils ont détaillé la façon dont les diamants qui viennent de l'Afrique centrale, Centrafrique, s'alimentent des réseaux régionaux. Donc, à ce niveau-là, il n'y a pas de débat. Il y a beaucoup d'études que tu peux consulter, vraiment vérifier que le diamant Centrafrique, le diamant qui n'est pas encore déclaré comme le diamant des zones confort, s'alimente des réseaux régionaux de trafic et de contrebande. Donc ça, c'est pas quelque chose, on doute. Le deux, à ce qui concerne langage politique, que l'État centrafrique a tous les contrôles au niveau sécuritaire, c'est à vérifier. Ici peu, 2021, on savait que même les groupes armés, ils ont arrivé aux barrières, on parle PK12, 12 km de la ville, pour prendre le pouvoir par force. Oui, on sait que Wagner, avec les alliés du gouvernement, ils ont essayé de pousser les groupes armés. Mais la raison pour laquelle le processus de Kimberley refuse de valider les zones additionnelles, notamment à l'Est, à cause même elles, ils ne sont pas sûrs si le gouvernement
I think Maxi is breaking. Eleanor, if I can turn to you, and perhaps you could address the last question that we have now, and then we can go back to Maxi when he's back.
I can. Sorry, which question is that?
There is a question that I think you could touch upon. Is there any realistic chance that the processing countries and the consuming nations beyond could contribute to a fund which is not used without middlemen to provide support to local communities? And perhaps you can touch upon on the other ones that you feel comfortable in answering.
I can certainly try. I haven't heard this. Hi, Ewan. I haven't heard this prospect floated before. I think there are. This is something that we've discussed quite extensively in this series on sanctions more broadly. I think one of the clear conclusions that we've arrived at across contexts is that restrictions and regulations and trade regimes alone are going to be are only going to deliver you very limited and potentially counterproductive results. And I think that this is it's different. I suppose that, the obvious question would be who pays for it. I haven't personally seen much discussion about these kinds of ideas. I'm sure that they've been floated, that variations of this have been floated by the civil society component of the Kimberley process. But yeah, it would certainly be nice to see. It would certainly be nice to see intermediate steps being taken to, at the very least, support mining communities for as long as they can't trade. And it's worth saying that the Kimberley process doesn't forbid in-country sale within suspended countries. It can't. Its only ban is on exports from countries that it has suspended, or in the case of CAR areas that it has suspended. So nothing stops stockpiling of diamonds from red zones. Nothing stops the purchase in country of diamonds from red zones. So which obviously is a bit of a double-edged sword. That is a loophole that can be used by less ethical buyers to get their own stockpiles at low prices and then either smuggle them or sell them on later. Equally, there may be space there for a more elaborate set of public-private partnerships, or for various schemes to try and lend different measures of support to people who are dependent on these revenues. And I'll quickly take Mamadou's question about whether we can confirm that Wagner mercenaries exploit diamonds in CAR. I can't direct you to any personal research, but yeah, there have certainly been investigations into uses into Wagner, now Africa Corps' involvement in CAR's diamonds. There's a report that describes a company called Diamville, which is believed to be connected to Wagner, and the report lays out quite convincingly the trail of ownership that leads back to them. And yeah, it is one of CAR's major economic sectors, so it would be surprising if they haven't maintained that or enhanced their position in that, particularly when, as we say, there are large stocks of diamonds in CAR that currently can't be sold on the formal market, and Wagner, given their grey zone position at the border of licit and illicit activity, and given their extremely powerful position in CAR, are in a very good position to exploit.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, for taking up the questions. It seems like Maxi and Vianney haven't come back yet. So sorry to put you on the spotlight, but if you could perhaps take on Tariq's question on how would you address the problem that the KP process cannot finance itself, if you have any thoughts on that.
It's a really difficult, I think the problem is that it's it's got to be at the moment. I think Maxi said used similar words, and I've heard other experts describe the Kimberley Process framework as it stands in CAR as a kind of compromise that satisfies no one. This half in, half out situation very clearly isn't helping anyone. For what it's worth, I think the KP structure, particularly the KP Civil Society Coalition, are very vocal about this and probably very aware of this. The question is, what do you do if you don't have it? There's the struggles of implementing the KP operational framework in CAR are very is a pretty technical conversation, but there are a lot of technical problems, as Maxi described, and there's also has been at times a strong lack of political will to make it work. The dilemma is, if you don't have that, do you lift the suspension and open the door to the export of diamonds from mines where we know rebel activity is still very strong in the surrounding areas? I don't have a good answer to that. I'm not sure what the single best response to that would be. There's no perfect solution here. However, yeah, I think it is fair to say that if a country is going to be kept under suspension, there is definitely a moral duty by all of the stakeholders who want to keep the KP credible and who want to keep it in place. And there is still there is still a lot of desire to keep the KP in place and to keep it looking squeaky clean and credible. And so there certainly can and probably should be calls for the stakeholders who want to keep it working to provide the money to do so, and to not have that put on the Central African government. But I am not sure how likely those questions are likely to resolve. How likely those questions are to being resolved. This will be an interesting year because there has actually quite recently been a scoping visit by the president of the process to Central African Republic, and it's one of the very important items on the agenda that was set at the KP's intersessionary meeting a couple of weeks ago. So there is definitely a lot of internal pressure to take action of some sort, but I think there's still a lot of mystery about what direction that's going to take, because there aren't any solutions that are going to satisfy everyone, and certainly taking the restrictions away does come with questions of its own.
Thank you. And we have still a few minutes, and there is another question in the Q&A. With the dramatic growth of lab-grown diamonds, if you have seen this affecting the KP process and criminal shaping in general.
Yeah, this is a great question, just because it's I was looking at some of the statements from the World Diamond Council, which is the diamond industry's lobbying organization within the KP, yesterday. And one of the very frequent statements that you see is the need to remind the world of the beauty and value of natural diamonds. So it's certainly something that they are worried about, and it's certainly there is certainly now a growing option for consumers who may be worried about the ethical implications of diamonds to buy these synthetic alternatives. I hope that this will put a certain amount of pressure on the KP to take reform seriously, and that's certainly what the KP Civil Society Coalition is also hoping for. That this will incentivize updating the definition so that at the moment the structure is actually able to compete with the claim that synthetic diamonds can make, which is that no one was hurt in the creation of this product. And at the moment, given that the KP definition is so dated and so narrow, there is still plenty of room within that framework for unethical labor and even for conflict diamonds in the broader sense, even if there are not rebel groups involved. So I certainly hope that that competition will inspire a bit of urgency in the reform process, and some serious thought about how the situation for Central Africans can be improved in that regard.
Thank you. Well, I think we're going towards the end of this webinar. I would like to thank you, Eleanor, and thank you also Maxi and Vinny for their interventions, and contributions to the panel today. Thank you all the participants for the questions and enriching this conversation. I would like to remind you that this webinar was recorded, so you can access the recording in the Global Initiative's website. And also remind you to join us in our next webinar, part of this Sanctions and Organized Crime series, which is taking place on the 6th of June. And it will be another case study, so we'll discuss the impact on sanctions in Haiti. So please join us and keep following the work of this work stream on sanctions and organized crime, and check on Eleanor's report, which is very interesting, and I think the link is on the chat. Thank you very much for joining us today.